Hello there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 607 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Y'all know what time it is. The weekend is upon us. We're getting close. Duke UNC at Cameron Indoor Stadium, Saturday night. It's going down, so we have to preview it. Again, this is the game that we're all looking forward to. There's a lot of implications riding behind it, including a 1 seed in the ACC Tournament. I am Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. I'm still in San Diego. Spoiler alert. We had to talk about Kama Malawach very quickly, and then we're going to talk about this. So go back to your feed, listen to us be giddy about Kama Malawach, and then come back here, or listen to this one and go back. Either way, that's why you have it in your feed. That's why you subscribe. I'm Donald One. I'm your host for this episode. Jason Evans is with me. Jason, we ready for the game on Saturday?
Oh boy, are we ever ready for this game on Saturday against Carolina? This is going to be a heck of a contest, and ACC number 1 seed on the line.
Yeah, we'll talk about those implications and all the scenarios for the 1 seed after the break. But first, let's get into, of course, the North Carolina Tar Heels. Since we last played them back on February 3rd, they are 6-2. They've beaten Miami twice. They beat Virginia Tech, Virginia, NC State, and then they just beat Notre Dame on Tuesday night. Their losses came basically in quick succession. One right after we played them. They played Clemson and lost at home just the second time ever. They have lost to Clemson at UNC, and then they also lost to Syracuse on the road. Now, Jason, I think the one thing about UNC is when we last played them, there was a couple of guys that just went off. And I know we'll get into the players in a minute, but in Cameron, this is going to have a lot of pageantry, right? Game days there as they were for the game in Chapel Hill. It's senior night for us, so we're going to be honoring the 3 seniors that are on the team: Spencer Hubbard, Jeremy Roach, and Ryan Young, the super duper senior. We're going to have a lot of things behind it, and everyone who's been out there in Caveville tenting for the last 2 months, it's ready. The powder keg is here. So throw everything out. I know we're going to talk about metrics and all this. People, I hate telling you to disregard what Jason's about to say, but disregard the metrics in this game. Think about them, but understand that everything could possibly change the win because that's how this game is.
Yeah, look, before I get to the metrics, you mentioned game day is coming to Cameron. By the way, this will be the record, the 13th time that Duke has hosted College Game Day. It breaks a tie. We were tied at 12 with UNC and Kansas. It is also Duke's record 28th total time as being part of the game day game. UNC 27, Kansas 23, Kentucky 22, Duke out front now with 28. By the way, the reason that Duke and UNC are side by side, Duke with 13, Carolina with 12, Duke with 28 total games, Carolina 27, because the Duke Carolina game is almost always College Game Day.
Well, Jason, if you remember, it used to not be. It used to just be the final game of the season was because that was the one on the weekend. The first one back in the day used to be on like a Wednesday or a Thursday. And I think there was even that one, was it a Friday or something that was delayed due to snow?
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
So it
used to be a Raycom game. Like
right. Jefferson
certain markets you'd see it on Raycom, which was just wow.
Shout out G-Man.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think now that they're both on weekends, it's like, at least for ESPN, it's very easy. Pencil those 2 weeks in and then figure out the rest.
Exactly. All right. So now let's get to a little bit of the advanced metrics. Bart Torvik says that since the last Carolina game, the Blue Devils are the number 3 team in all of college basketball, while North Carolina is number 22. As Donald mentioned, they've dropped a couple contests in that time. That said, they looked very, very impressive in their latest game, beating the absolute doors off of Notre Dame. It's worth noting Notre Dame had been playing way, way better lately, and Carolina just discarded them like they were, a piece of lint being flipped.
It was over by the under 12 media timeout in the first half. It was ugly.
Yeah. All right. A couple interesting things about what Carolina was and what they are today. When we last played them, they had the number 21 offense in the country and the number 7 defense, according to Ken Pomeroy. That's what they were back then. Today, they have the number 6 defense. So the defense went from 7 to it's basically the same defense. But the offense has slipped. Not a lot, but a little bit. They were number 21. They're now number 26. Duke, on the other hand, this is definitely worth noting. After the last Carolina game, Duke was number 10 on offense, number 38 on defense, according to Pomeroy. Today, we're number 7 on offense, number 22 on defense. So you've seen this Duke team markedly improve a little bit on offense, but really the big improvement has been on defense. Since our last game, the Duke team is way better on defense, while Carolina's D remains about the same. Their offense has gotten a little bit worse. All right. Currently, UNC is number 8 in Pomeroy's rankings. Duke is number 7. Carolina is number 8. We are very, very evenly matched up, these two teams. Interesting thing about Carolina is they play super fast on offense. If you look at their pace of play, the Carolina fast break is a very real thing. They play significantly faster this year on offense than they did the past couple years. The first 2 years under Hubert Davis, they were playing like with 100th. Their offensive pace was like in the hundreds. This year, it's in the 30s. So you can see they've picked up the speed. I think a lot of that is RJ Davis and Elliot Cadeau really getting out. The moment there's a rebound, the moment there's a made basket, doesn't matter what it is, Carolina is getting the ball in those guys' hands, and they're pushing it up the floor, trying to see if they can get a quick bucket. Remarkably, for a team that plays fast, they play really clean. This UNC team is top 25 in the country in turnover percentage. They hit better than 50% of their 2-point shots, which is pretty good. They hit an impressive 35.5% from 3-point range. They do a nice job of getting to the free throw line, and they hit better than 75% from there. But as I mentioned, the defense is where UNC really excels. They contest everything. And by doing that, they force opponents to only hit about 45% of their 2-point field goals, which is really, really impressive. Most teams are right around 50. Against Carolina, only about 45%. Also, teams only hit about 31% of their 3-point field goals against UNC. I think this game, to some extent, could come down to whether Duke, by the way, Duke, a team that hits close to 40%, 38% from 3-point range, whether Duke can hit close to our usual number of 3-pointers against Carolina, because Carolina usually doesn't give up a lot of 3-pointers. If Carolina holds Duke to something like 30% from 3-point range, this could be a tough game for Duke. Whereas if Duke's getting up close to that 40% mark that we usually are, it's going to be a problem for UNC. They force you to go one-on-one to get buckets. Carolina, one of the best teams in the country, 8th best team in the country at defensive assist percentage. They do not allow you to pass the ball around and get a good, easy shot. If Duke is getting assists, pay attention to that. Is Duke scoring off the bounce, or is Duke scoring off the pass? If Duke is getting assists, it means that they are picking apart this Carolina defense. That would be a big, big thing in this game. And the one thing about Carolina's defense they don't do well is they do not turn teams over. They're 299th in the country in defensive turnover percentage. For a defense as great as they are, for a top 10 defense in the country, to not get turnovers, it shows you how well they do everything else. But it also says this to you: we just cannot turn the ball over. We can't give Carolina easy defensive possessions like that, because it will come back to haunt us. Last note about Carolina in terms of the advanced stats, it's the rebounding. They're a pretty good rebounding team, thanks to Armando Bacot and Harrison Ingram. 16th best defensive rebounding team in the country. If Sean Stewart, if Ryan Young, if Kyle Filipowski, if Mark Mitchell are getting offensive rebounds, that's a big deal, because usually teams get very, very few offensive rebounds against UNC. They're not quite as good, Carolina is, on the offensive board as they are on the defensive boards, but they're still fairly good. In the last game, when we played UNC, they out-rebounded us 35-34. It was close, but UNC did win the Battle of the Boards. That is the last time. 10 games ago. That is the last time that Duke was out-rebounded. We have out-rebounded every single opponent since then. You and I have talked about, Donald, what a key stat rebounding is for Duke. That when Duke out-rebounds the opposition, we win virtually every single time. Well, the rebounding battle will be huge against UNC. They won it last time. Look for Duke to win it this time if Duke's going to be on the right end of the score.
There's a couple of things that I want to know besides the rebounding, which I think is the stat that we've kind of been looking at all year and how that has progressed, especially for Duke. 2 things from UNC's angle that I am looking at. The first thing is, can they score on our offense? The last team, right? The last game we played them, it was 93-84. Very uncharacteristic for us to allow 93 points, but it's also uncharacteristic for us to allow more than 70. The only team since then that has scored more than 69 points against us was Wake Forest. Everyone else is 69 points or small or fewer. That is how good our defense has been lately. And of course, we have Virginia who scored 48, but Virginia is another story on offense. I think the other thing, Jason, the one thing that I learned this the other day, Connor O'Neill from Devils Illustrated, he put out this stat, which I think is incredible and has talked about one of our favorite stats, the assist percentage. Duke is undefeated, 17-0 when its assist rate is above 50%. And when it's 50% or worse, they're 6-6. There's your ball game, ladies and gentlemen. And it makes sense because of how we play, passing the ball around, getting open shots, and knocking them down. In Cameron, we are much better at knocking down open shots. That's our gym. Those are our rims. We're gonna hit those open shots. And even if we struggle, we're gonna work our way around and figure out how to get open spaces on the court and make things happen. So look for that assist percentage rate. If it is above 50%, that means Duke is clicking on offense. That means we are getting open looks. That means we're making them and knocking them down. And that means we'll probably have a really good chance to win that ball game. And I think, again, it's indicative of a lot of things that we do on offense well. That stat stands out every single time we have a good production on offense.
Yeah, I want to bring up one other thing to be on the lookout for, and that's Carolina coming out of halftime. One of our listeners, Brian O'Malley, sent us a really interesting email. And it was a graph of the scoring from the previous two Carolina games, a pair of victories. They beat NC State and they beat Notre Dame. We mentioned they blew the doors off of Notre Dame. The NC State game, even though the final score was 79-70, Carolina just destroyed NC State in the second half. State was winning that game significantly in the first half, and Carolina just crushed them in the second half. And Brian pointed out, coming out of the locker room, this Carolina team went on huge, huge runs where their stifling defense did not allow teams to score much at all. Against NC State, Carolina went on a 14-2 run, walking out the door of the halftime. And only minutes after that, they then went on a 15-2 run to salt the game away in the first 10 minutes of the second half. Again, this was a game where Carolina was trailing at halftime, 14-2, got rid of trailing, and then 15-2 a couple minutes later, got us a big lead, and then Carolina coasted to victory. Against Notre Dame, Donald, there was a 19-0 run. Started just before halftime, but most of that came after the halftime buzzer, where they held the Irish scoreless for the first 5 minutes of the second half. And then later in that game, just a few minutes later, they went on an 18-0 run. This Carolina team, at least lately, playing great basketball in the second half. Duke needs to make sure, if we get out to a lead, even if it's just competitive, whatever it may be, do not think that you got things in the bag against this Carolina team. Maintain your intensity, because they have shown again and again this year that they are a team very, very capable of playing at a high level in the second half. They're a super experienced team. We've talked about this in the past. With the exception of Elliot Cadeau, everybody else in that team is like fourth year or fifth year seniors. I mean, these are guys who've been around forever. They're like, I think they're top 3 most experienced teams in all of college basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And if Duke gets out to a lead, Carolina understands what it needs to do, what it takes to get back in the game. You must maintain intensity and focus against them at all times.
Jason, what are the 2 things that we usually focus on when it comes to how we kind of gauge how Duke is playing? It's the first 4 minutes of the first half, and it's the first 4 minutes of the second half.
Yep.
There are games where we've come out flat from halftime and gotten rocked, and we either struggle to get back or we end up losing that ball game. Same thing with the slow starts. Those are the 2 things that cannot happen in this game. You could go back and forth, right? I don't mind the back and forth. If it's like a 9-8 game at the first TV timeout, cool. Like you're battling, you're going toe to toe. You just like a real fight, right? You're kind of establishing your position. You're seeing what the opponent's giving you, and then you figure out how to deal from there. But coming out of the halftime break, that is where the adjustment should already be there. There's no feeling out the opponent. You know what the opponent's doing. Now it is time to shock them. And that's what UNC has been doing very well lately, is shocking the other team. And they can't do anything to really like handle that. So for Duke, we have to come out strong. We have to come out with the intensity, with the fire. Cameron crazies, everybody in Cameron, from the people behind the bench all the way up to the tippy top. And I know that's not that tall. All of you need to be on this as well. That energy needs to be palpable from the moment you step foot into that arena bowl. Everything needs to be on the line. It's not just for the guys on the floor, but for you guys as well. Do it for everybody who would want to be at that game, because that is the intangible here, is that when the game is in Cameron, they cannot hear themselves think. I can barely do it. Jason, you and I have sat at a UNC game together, and I couldn't hear you, and you were sitting right next to me. That's what it should be. You shouldn't be. It should be where you turn around, you go, what? What? Because you can't hear the person next to you. But imagine our team is used to that. UNC, as many times as they play the Dean Dome, is not. That is the intangible ready for tomorrow or for Saturday night. And I can't wait for you guys to show that. But I think it all goes down. It also fuels the intensity whenever the guys have a lapse. And that's going to happen. You're going to have some breakdowns on defense or something like that. Whenever they need a bolt or a jolt, give it to them. Don't wait. Don't labor the fact. Get on them and say, hey, next play, we're going to go down here. We're going to get a bucket. And now we're going to come back on defense and we're going to be physical. We're going to be in their throats and we're going to take the ball away from them, go the other way. That is what this game is going to be about. It's not going to be, hopefully it won't be a long run, but it's going to be a fight back and forth, back and forth. It's those intangibles that'll win this ball game.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And there's just a lot to play for in this game. It is
a ton.
It is a really big deal game. I'm going to go ahead and say if Duke doesn't win this game, there's no chance we'll be seated higher than Carolina. And I think losing this game, even if Duke wins the ACC tournament, it takes a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament off the table. It takes it off the table. Duke could be, I think, as high as a 3, but it takes a 2 seed off the table if Duke loses this game, in my opinion. So it's a big deal. And then there's the ACC regular season race. But Donald, I think we could take a break and then get to that, right?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of scenarios that will break down whether Duke ends up number 1 or number 2 in the ACC tournament, which comes to my hood in Washington, D.C. After the break, stick around and find out what the scenarios will be. All right, Jason, we are back, and it's time to discuss the ACC tournament, at least the scenarios. And we're not focusing on 3 through 15 because we don't care about that. Duke will be either a 1 seed or a 2 seed in the ACC tournament next week in Washington, D.C. But right now we're the 2. And of course, staring in front of us is number 1 seed at this point, UNC. But a lot can change should we win on Saturday night. Jason, I know you've crunched some of the numbers. I've looked at some of them, but take it from here. What does Duke, this is the easiest question in the world. What does Duke need to do to get the 1 seed in the ACC tournament besides beat North Carolina?
We need to get some help. And the help comes from 2 different teams. Those teams are the Clemson Tigers and the NC State Wolfpack. It really comes down to, Donald, it comes down to this more than anything else. Pitt hosts NC State. If NC State wins at Pittsburgh and Duke, all this is assuming Duke beats UNC. If Duke loses to UNC, we're the 2 seed, they're the 1 seed, forget it. Hey, let's wrap up the podcast. We're finished then. But we're presuming if Duke wins, if NC State beats Pitt, Duke is the number 2 seed. Period. End of story. Because the key tiebreakers here involve your record against teams that are high up in the standings. And so for Duke, like the critical things to look at are, where does Wake Forest and where does Pitt finish in the standings? Because those are the 2 teams that Duke lost to that Carolina defeated. And from Carolina's standpoint, it's where do Clemson and Syracuse finish in the standings? Because Carolina lost to those 2 teams and Duke did not. So those are the sort of the teams, their position in the standings determines where Duke and UNC are. And
so, Jason, real quick, just to simplify things a bit, to make, because people are probably asking, what are these tiebreakers you're talking about? Obviously, the ACC has a bunch of tiebreakers when teams are deadlocked in the standings to kind of separate them. And when it comes to Duke UNC, of course, the first one is record. And if we beat UNC on Saturday, we will have the same conference record. They don't take the non-conference into consideration, so they go to the next one, which is head-to-head. Of course, we will have split those games, us winning at Cameron, them winning at Carolina. And so you then go to what Jason is going through, which is the rest of the ACC. They will start at number 3 and they go, hey, Virginia, how do these 2 teams play against each other? Number 4, how do they play against each other? And all the way down until they find some separation. Now, the reason why some of these teams are involved here is because against Virginia, both UNC and Duke have beaten Virginia. 1-0 and 2-0 does not matter in this situation. 1-1 doesn't matter in this situation. So then you go to the next ones. And because there's kind of a log jam between like 4 and 10, there's a lot that could change. And whoever's number 4 is going to be the next one, right? And for us, you mentioned Clemson and you mentioned NC State because Pitt would be knocked down. The other team involved in that is Syracuse. Why? Because we were undefeated against Syracuse and Clemson, and UNC lost to them. Whether it's 1 loss or 2 losses, doesn't matter. The fact is we're undefeated against them, and they have lost the game against them. So those are the 2 teams that we want to have higher up in the standings because we want to get to them first. Because once we get to them first, that knocks UNC out and puts us in the 1 seed.
Yes. And as I said, the easiest way to accomplish all this is for Pitt to lose at home to NC State. Frankly, that's a little bit unlikely. But if that happens, then the Blue Devils beat Carolina, we're the number 1 seed. The other scenario then, assuming Pitt wins, which I think is the more likely thing. Pitt, by the way, congrats to Jeff Capel. They've been playing really good basketball lately. Mm-hmm. They are on a roll. It's a pity that things sort of started out rough for them in the ACC because they could be very much in the NCAA tournament conversation. In fact, it's not crazy that they could play their way into it in if they do really well in the ACC tournament.
Their team you kind of want to avoid in the ACC tournament if you can.
Yeah. But so assuming Pitt beats NC State, the other scenario is the Clemson Wake Forest game. Now that game is being played at Wake. And if Wake wins that game, Duke gets the number 2 seed. If Clemson wins that game, Duke gets the number 1 seed. So like I was saying earlier, root for NC State and root for Clemson, because if either of those 2 things happen, if NC State wins or Clemson wins, or if both of them win, then assuming the Blue Devils take care of business against UNC, we would be the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament.
Now, it also makes sense that there's only a couple of games involved because literally last night, it was like 5 or 6 scenarios that would make us have the 2 seed. The scenarios were drastically reduced for us to have the 2 seed if we beat Carolina because of the fact that Wake Forest lost at home for the first time this season. They lost to Georgia Tech, who shout out Georgia Tech, like just beating everybody. Home record undefeated, take that away from you. Duke UNC, easy cake. But the fact is that reduced a lot of the scenarios for UNC to continue to claim the number 1 spot, even if they lost. I still think there's a couple of scenarios out there. But again, I think the main catch is this. You want to end with Clemson or Syracuse in the number 4 spot or the number 5 spot. Because if you get to those, then of course we have the tiebreaker over there. If NC State elevates himself, then I believe where it's tied in, you keep going further. In the end of the day, you don't want Pitt in that scenario because if Pitt is higher than those teams, that's really the one team that Duke can't have in the 4 spot or the 5 spot. But I've even seen some scenarios, Jason. There's a website that you can change victors and see how it plays out. There's some where it even goes all the way down to like number 11. That's how jumbled like the middle of the pack here is in the ACC. Yeah. That you could go all the way down to number 11 based on who's playing who and say, oh, that's what's going to determine the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament. But that's why this last day is going to be super, super incredible to watch.
Well, but again, I think it's the easiest scenario is you need to root against Pittsburgh. You need to root against Wake Forest. Mm-hmm. Period. End of story. And Pittsburgh is the most important one there because right now Pitt has sort of the inside track on getting that number 4 seed. All they have to do is win, and they're right in there. And in that case, it becomes, Duke would be playing for number 2. So we'll see what happens. It's exciting. It's fun. The reality is, I don't know that there's a huge difference in being number 1 or number 2. If provided Duke wins the game and we're tied with Carolina at 16-4 in the ACC, to me, that's the most important thing. Because that's the scenario where the NCAA selection committee starts looking at the Blue Devils on the number 2 seed line, I think, instead of the number 3 seed line.
Right. It's 12 p.m. Thursday versus 7 p.m. Thursday. Take your pick. I think either one means that you're doing pretty well in the season. But yes, it all starts with a win on Saturday. That's the first thing we need to worry about. Again, I hate that Jason did a bunch of stuff that we have to throw out the window, but winning, beating UNC is the important thing here. Everybody in Cameron, I swear to you, if you are not the loudest you've ever been in your life, I will come find you, and you're gonna have to deal with me. You're gonna have to deal with Jason. Do the thing on Saturday. We are so ready. Go to hell, Carolina. That's gonna wrap it up for episode number 607 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Remember, after the game, we're probably not gonna record after the game because if we win, we're probably gonna go celebrate. I'm in San Diego, Jason's in Atlanta. We're gonna tear the town up. But DBR Podcast at gmail.com. Get your headlines in. I know we're gonna have a bunch of them. We will be back over the weekend to record the recap for UNC and also, of course, begin the preparations for the ACC tournament. If you're coming to the ACC tournament, email us as well. I will obviously be there. It's my hometown. I don't have to move very far to get there, so it would be a shame for me to miss those games, and I hope to see some of you there.
Yeah, dude, you better pick a good spot to meet with folks because there can be people who want to get their piece of Donald wine.
Well, I mean, look, Miami's also playing, and they've not been good this year. So I might be going to this tournament starting on Tuesday because that's where Miami is at this point. So it's gonna be a long week for me, but I'm looking forward to it all. Again, that's all for next week. Go to hell, Carolina. Go to hell. This is the DBR Podcast. For Jason, I am Donald. Now it's time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.